William Golding's The Lord of the Flies, page 134, chapter 9, A View to the Death. Over the island, the buildup of clouds continued. A steady current of heated air rose all day from the mountain and was thrust to 10,000 feet. Revolving masses of gas piled up the static until the air was ready to explode. By early evening, the sun had gone and a brassy glare had taken the place of clear daylight. Even the air that pushed in from the sea was hot and held no refreshment. Colors drained from water and trees and pink surfaces of rock, and the white and brown clouds brooded. Nothing prospered but the flies, who blackened their lord and made the split guts look like a heap of glistening coal. Even when the vessel broke in Simon's nose and the blood gushed out, they left him alone, preferring the pig's high flavor. Even when the vessel broke in Simon's nose and the blood gushed out, they left him alone, preferring the pig's high flavor. With the running of the blood, Simon's fit passed into the weariness of sleep. He lay in the mat of creepers while the evening advanced and the cannon continued to play. At last he woke and saw dimly the dark earth close by his cheek. Still he did not move, but lay there, his face sideways on the earth, his eyes looking dully before him. Then he turned over, drew his feet under him, and laid hold of the creepers to pull himself up. When the creepers shook, the flies exploded from the guts with a vicious note and clamped back on again. Simon got to his feet. The light was unearthly. The light was unearthly. The Lord of the Flies hung on his stick like a black ball. The Lord of the Flies hung on his stick like a black ball. Simon spoke aloud to the clearing. "What else is there to do?" Nothing replied. Simon turned away from the open space and crawled through the creepers till he was in the dusk of the forest. He walked drearily between the trunks, his face empty of expression, and the blood was dry round his mouth and chin. Only sometimes, as he lifted the ropes of creeper aside and chose his direction from the trend of the land, he mouthed words that did not reach the air. Presently the creepers festooned the trees less frequently, and there was a scatter of pearly light from the sky down through the trees. This was the backbone of the island, the slightly higher land that lay beneath the mountain, where the forest was no longer deep jungle. Here there were wide spaces interspersed with thickets and huge trees, and the trend of the ground led him up. As the forest opened, he pushed on, staggering sometimes with his weariness, but never stopping. The usual brightness was gone from his eyes, and he walked with a sort of glum determination, like an old man. A buffet of wind made him stagger, and he saw that he was out in the open on rock under a brassy sky. He found his legs were weak and his tongue gave him pain all the time. When the wind reached the mountain top, he could see something happen, a flicker of blue stuff. Deliver that sweet day, cheat day, never miss a beat day, Sunday. Simon awakens and finds the air dark and humid with an approaching storm. His nose is bleeding. He staggers towards the mountain in a daze. He crawls up the hill, and in the failing light, he sees the dead pilot with his flapping parachute, watching the parachute rise. This is from sparknotes.com. Watching the parachute rise and fall with the wind, Simon realizes that the boys have mistaken this harmless object for the deadly beast that has plunged their entire group into chaos. When Simon sees the corpse of the parachutist, he begins to vomit. When he is finished, he untangles the parachute lines, freeing the parachute from the rocks, anxious to prove to the group that the beast is not real at all. Simon stumbles toward the distant light of the fire at Jack's feast to tell the other boys what he has seen. Piggy and Ralph go to the feast with the hopes that they will be able to keep some control over the events at the feast. The boys are laughing and eating the roasted pig. Jack sits like a king on a throne. His face is painted like a savage, languidly issuing commands and waited on by boys acting as his servants. After the large meal, Jack extends an invitation to all of Ralph's followers to join his tribe. Most of them accept, despite Ralph's attempts to dissuade them. As it starts to rain, Ralph Ralph asks Jack how he plans to weather the storm, considering he has not built any shelters. In response, Jack orders his tribe to do its wild hunting dance. Do the dance. Chanting and dancing in several separate circles along the beach, the boys are caught up in a kind of frenzy. Even Ralph and Piggy, swept up by the excitement, dance on the fringes of the group. They've been afraid of this boogeyman. The boogeyman, I think they went up, they saw the parachutist, and it was the silhouette. They saw the shadow, and they said, oh my God, there's a person up there. And then they ran off before they figured out. And then Simon, chapter 9, so that it's halfway through the book, chapter 9, eventually Simon goes up and says, oh my God, it's a dead parachutist. It's a dead parachutist. That's what you've been afraid of? The boogeyman? You've been afraid of a boogeyman. You've been afraid of The boys again reenact the hunting of the pig, reach a high pitch of frenzied energy as they chant and dance. Suddenly the boys see a shadowy figure creep out of the forest. It's Simon, yet in their wild state, however, the boys don't recognize him. Someone shouts, he's the beast, and the boys descend upon Simon, then they start to tear him apart. With their bare hands and teeth, Simon tries desperately to explain what has happened and to remind them of who he is. But he trips and plunges over the rocks onto the beach. The boys fall on him violently and kill him. The storm explodes over the island. In the whipping rain, the boys run for shelter. Howling wind and waves wash Simon's mangled corpse into the ocean, where it drifts away, surrounded by glowing fish. At the same time, the wind blows the body of the parachutist off the side of the mountain and onto the beach, sending the boys screaming into the darkness. Oh man, I bet that was pretty terrifying. They thought they were attacking the boogeyman, but it was actually attacking one of their own, and then the boogeyman, by an act of God, fell right in front of them, sending the corpse into the ocean. Makes me think of Bin Laden. So when I think about Christianity, right, you have Jesus the Christ who's going to die on the cross, and he died for our sins, right? Now, some people, what's that, you had that one famous speech, I don't want you to go and die for your country. Don't die for your country. Shoot, and if you got to kill for your country, but don't go and die. You dying doesn't help anybody. What helps if you want to win the war is to make the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. Jesus died for our sins, right? Humanity's sins. Jesus died for humanity's sins. But he didn't hurt anybody. He didn't do anything to anybody. He was just a victim. And he got tortured and beat up, and he was, talked bad about his entire life, tried to feed the poor, tried to speak up and say, hey, we could do better. This is the Roman Empire. Was it Tiberius? How come we don't talk about Tiberius being the damn emperor during Jesus' time? Regardless, what I want to say is that we're kind of a Christian nation. A lot of Christians, a lot of churches all over the place. Samantha Spade, Christian Glass. You even have a man, a 22-year-old named Christian Glass. Johnny Hurley, Isaiah Brown. How many people have been crucified? How many people have been crucified by, this reason or that reason? Most of these are with police brutality. So Christian Glass, what did Christian Glass do? His mistake was calling the police. He should have got out and just pushed his own car out of the ditch and then drove on. He should never have trusted that the police would know what to do, or that they were like social workers and that they were good with mental health episodes. They're not. They suck with homelessness. They suck with drugs, domestic violence. They suck with mental health. Call the cops if there's like some violent thing that's going on, but if it's not a big violent thing that's going on, don't call the police. Don't call the police. So when I think about how many people, the KKK, right? How many people have been lynched? Every single one of them, like 95%, were crucified. So why are we going to, as a nation, if we're a Christian nation, why do we worship this person that died 2,000 years ago when we just had somebody that just got shot and killed, not a month or two ago? Did Christian Glass not die for our sins? Johnny Hurley, did he not die for our sins? Isaiah Brown, did he not die for our sins? Samantha Spade, she's a little bit of a different thing, but she died unnecessarily. Christian, she was valedictorian and a Christian. Do we still talk about Samantha Spade? What was her philosophy? She's forever young. She is forever young, and she died before her time. So how many people get crucified? How many people get crucified in America without anybody saying a goddamn word about it? If we give a shit about Jesus the Christ dying for his, whatever cause, then why don't we give a shit about other people and whatever they died for and whatever their cause was? I will say, being the victim is, feels better than being the perpetrator. That's for damn sure. I'd rather be Jesus Christ than Pontius Pilate in that story, in terms of being on the side of goodness. But Pontius Pilate is the judge, and the Pontius Pilate gets to live. People would say, who would arrest Anne Frank? Well, the police arrested, Anne Frank. Who would arrest Frederick Douglass? That's kind of where the police had its origins, being slave catchers. The police would catch Frederick Douglass. Oh, you need to get back on that plantation. You better listen to your massa. Who would arrest Frederick Douglass? Who would arrest Anne Frank? And then J.C. Dugard. She didn't get arrested, but he was... They did visits for 2 decades. He went to jail, so they knew he was a convict. They went to his damn house, and they saw nothing. So you have a whole bunch of people that are being crucified. Simon is going to get crucified, and what did Simon do? Even Ralph and Jack, and Jack is the one that the wild one, and then Ralph is the civilized one, right? And then Piggy. But even Piggy and Ralph participated in the killing of Simon. So both the good and the bad murdered their buddy. Both the good and the bad, because they were so goddamned afraid of the dark, of the abyss, of the unknown. They were so goddamned afraid of the parachutist, of a dead parachutist being the boogeyman. They scared themselves into a fucking maniacal frenzy. And they wind up killing one of their own. Who was Simon? Simon wasn't on either, Jack's side or Ralph's side. And this symbolizes the loss of innocence. Is this when they get kicked out of the garden? I'm not for sure, but this is the loss of innocence. You just murdered one of your own. Before, you guys were all just having conversations and debating and arguing and whatnot, but now one of your own is dead. And then even, our guy, Ralph, had participated in the insanity. You okay? We want to read some more? Let's read a little bit more. Let's read the last part of it. Ralph stirred uneasily. Simon, sitting between the twins and Piggy, wiped his mouth and shoved his piece of meat over the rocks to Piggy, who grabbed it. The twins giggled, and Simon lowered his face in shame. Then Jack leapt to his feet, slashed off a great hunk of meat, and flung it down at Simon's feet. Eat! Damn you! He glared at Simon. Take it! He spun on his heel, center of a bewildered circle of boys. I got you meat! Numberless and inexpressible frustrations combined to make his rage elemental and awe-inspiring. I painted my face, I stole up, now you eat, all of you, and I. Slowly the silence on the mountaintop deepened till the click of the fire and the soft hiss of roasting meat could be heard clearly. Jack looked round for understanding, but found only respect. Ralph stood among the ashes of the signal fire, his hands full of meat, saying nothing. Then at last Maurice broke the silence. He changed the subject to the only one that could bring the majority of them together. Where did you find that pig? Roger pointed down the unfriendly side. They were there by the sea. Jack, recovering, could not bear to have his story told. He broke in quickly. We spread round. I crept on hands and knees. The spears fell out because they hadn't barbs on. The pig ran away and made an awful noise. It turned back and ran into the circle, bleeding. All the boys were talking at once, relieved and excited. We closed in. The first blow had paralyzed its hind quarters, so then the circle could close in and beat. I cut the pig's throat. The twins, still staring their identical grin, jumped up and ran round each other. Then the rest joined in, making pig-dying noises and shouting, "One for his knob! Give one for his 4-penny one!" Then Maurice pretended to be the pig and ran squealing into the center, and the hunters, circling still, pretended to beat him. As they danced, they sang, "Kill the pig, cut her throat, bash her in." Ralph watched them, envious and resentful. Not till they flagged and the chant died away did he speak. "I'm calling an assembly." One by one they halted and stood watching him with the conch. "I'm calling a meeting even if we have to go on into the dark, down on the platform. When I blow it, now." He turned away and walked off down the mountain. Beast from water. The tide was coming in, and there was only a narrow strip of firm beach between the water and the white stumbling stuff of the palm terrace. Beast from the water goes on for many pages. So do we have... Jack, you haven't gotten the conch. What about the conch? Piggy was so close, Ralph could see the glint of his glass. There's the fire, can't they see? Who's that sitting there? Me, Simon. Fat lot of good we are. Beast from air. Sliver of moon over the horizon. I believe it's out. He fiddled with the sticks. Ralph knelt in the entrance to the shelter and peered cautiously around him. Sam and Eric. Call them to an assembly quietly. Go on. The twins, holding tremulously to each other, dared the few yards to the next shelter and spread the dreary news. Simon was happy to be accepted, and then he ceased to think about himself. When he bashed into a tree, Ralph looked sideways impatiently, and Robert sniggered. Simon reeled, and a white spot on his forehead turned red and trickled. A white spot on his forehead turned red and trickled. That's like what do they say with Jesus, right? The holes in the hands just come in. What do they call that? There's like a fancy word for it. Ralph dismissed Simon and returned to his personal hell. They would reach the castle sometime, and the chief would have to go forward. Jack came trotting back. We're in sight now, all right. We'll get as close as we can. He followed Jack toward the castle, where the ground rose slightly. On their left was air, impenetrable tangle of creepers and trees. Why couldn't there be something in that? So when did they... Simon grinned and shook his head. Shadows intrigue, gifts for the view to the death, the shell and the glasses, Castle Rock. Gift for the darkness, is that where we're going to be? Ralph and Piggy lay in the sand gazing at the fire and idly flicking pebbles into its smokeless heart. That branch is gone. Where's Sam Narek? We ought to get some more wood. We're out of green branches. Ralph sighed and stood up. There were no shadows under the palms on the platform, only the strange light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. High up among the bulging clouds, thunder went off like a gun. We're going to get buckets of rain. What about the fire? Ralph trotted into the forest and returned with a wide spray of green, which he dumped on the fire. The branch crackled, the leaves curled, and the yellow smoke expanded. Piggy made an aimless little pattern in the sand with his fingers. Trouble is, we haven't got enough people for a fire. You got to treat Sam Narek as one turn. They do everything together, of course. Well, that isn't fair. Don't you see? They ought to do 2 turns. Ralph considered this and understood. He was vexed to find how little he thought like a grown-up inside. Again, the island was getting worse and worse. Piggy looked at the fire. You'll want another green branch soon. Ralph rolled over. Piggy, what are we going to do? Just have to get on without him. But the fire, he frowned at the black and white mess in which lay the unburnt ends of branches he tried to formulate. I'm scared. He saw Piggy look up and blundered on. Not of the beast. I mean, I'm scared of that too, but nobody else understands about the fire. If someone threw you a rope when you were drowning, If a doctor said take this because if you don't take it you'll die, you would, wouldn't you? I mean, of course I would. Can't they see? Can't they understand without the smoke signal we'll die here? Look at that. A wave of heated air trembled above the ashes, but without a trace of smoke. We can't keep one fire going.